Did the queen who unloaded mountains of gold at Solomon's feet leave him with a son and a dynasty? Today we're going to separate what the Bible actually records from the powerful stories that grew up around it, and follow the trail from the short biblical episode to the epic Ethiopian legend of Makeda and Menelik. The biblical text is short and surprisingly restrained. Both 1 Kings 10 and 2 Chronicles 9 describe a wealthy queen who traveled to Jerusalem to test Solomon's legendary wisdom. The account emphasizes her astonishment. She sees Solomon's wisdom, the splendor of his house, his table, his servants, and the abundant gifts he receives. The narrative reports that she gave him lavish presents, gold, spices, and precious items, and that Solomon's fame spread because of her visit. Crucially, the Bible does not give her a name. It does not describe a romantic relationship, and it does not say she bore Solomon a child. That silence matters. The biblical books tell us a vivid snapshot, a diplomatic or curiosity-driven visit from a foreign ruler who recognized Solomon's wisdom and wealth. They do not narrate a marriage, a pregnancy, or a dynastic union. If this seems anticlimactic compared to the later stories, that's intentional. The biblical writers were focused on Solomon's wisdom and the international recognition of his court. They didn't record family genealogies tied to every foreign visitor. So where did the idea that the queen left Solomon with a son come from? Let's look at the historical and cultural setting first, then at the traditions that later filled in the gaps. The kingdom usually associated with the Queen of Sheba is the Sabaean realm in southern Arabia, what is now part of modern Yemen, and possibly linked to the wider Sabaean cultural sphere that included parts of the Horn of Africa. Archaeology and inscriptions attested Sabaean polities between roughly the late 2nd and 1st millennia BCE. This region became wealthy through the incense and spice trade. Frankincense, myrrh, and other luxury goods moved along routes that connected Arabia, the Horn, and the Mediterranean world. So the biblical picture of a queen of the south arriving with gifts fits what we know about the prosperity and maritime connections of South Arabia and nearby regions. Still, material evidence does not record personal meetings between specific rulers across a millennium, nor does it confirm intimate relationships. Archaeology confirms a landscape of trade and occasional contact. It does not supply a registry of children fathered by visiting monarchs. In short, historical context makes the biblical encounter plausible, but it does not prove any detail not recorded in the text. Now to the traditions that made the story much larger. In Ethiopian Christian tradition, the queen is given a name, Makeda, and she becomes central to a national origin story. The medieval work known as the Kebra Nagast tells a long, elaborate narrative. Makeda visits Solomon, the two form a relationship, and she returns to Ethiopia pregnant with his son, Menelik. According to that account, Menelik later travels to Jerusalem, brings the Ark of the Covenant back to Ethiopia, and initiates a royal line that claims descent from David. This story became foundational for Ethiopian royal ideology, and remains profoundly important culturally and religiously for many Ethiopians. It is a powerful tradition that links Ethiopia's monarchy to the biblical house of David, and the tale is woven into liturgy, literature, and national memory. Islamic tradition also preserves the queen's visit, naming her Bilqis in some later Islamic writings, and in Islamic exegesis of the Quran. The Quranic account focuses on her recognition of Solomon's authority and her conversion or submission to God in a theological context. Some later Islamic literature elaborates with romantic or narrative flourishes, but canonical Islamic sources do not present a consistent, attestable claim that she bore Solomon a son who founded an Ethiopian dynasty. In both Christian Ethiopian and Muslim retellings, imaginative expansion serves theological, political, or cultural purposes, filling silences in the earlier texts with meaning relevant to the communities that preserved them. So how should we weigh these sources? Textually, the Bible is silent on any child. The later Ethiopian tradition explicitly claims one. Archaeology and Near Eastern inscriptions demonstrate that wealthy South Arabian polities existed, and that contact across the Red Sea was possible. but they do not verify the family ties that medieval narratives assert. Scholars therefore distinguish levels of evidence. The biblical narrative is a primary ancient text. The Kebra Nagast and related medieval works are later traditions that reflect the identity and self-understanding of Ethiopian Christianity. Archaeological data illuminate the economic and cultural background but stop short of confirming specific personal events described in legend. It's important to be clear about what this assessment does and does not do. Respect for religious traditions means recognizing their value as cultural memory and as sources of identity. The Ethiopian claim that Menelik was Solomon's son and that the ark came to Ethiopia is an internally coherent, meaningful narrative for many believers and for Ethiopian history, as lived in its own context. From a historical critical perspective, however, those claims move beyond the information the Bible gives, and beyond what current archaeological evidence can demonstrate conclusively. Scholars therefore treat them as powerful traditions rather than established historical facts. Let's answer the title directly. Did the Queen of Sheba have a child with Solomon? The Bible itself offers no such information. 1 Kings 10 and 2 Chronicles 9 describe the queen's visit, her gifts, and her admiring testimony of Solomon, but they do not give her name or say she bore a child. The idea that she did have a son who founded an Ethiopian royal line comes from later traditions, most famously the Ethiopian Kebra Nagast, which names her Makeda and credits her with a son, Menelik I. That tradition has deep cultural and religious weight, but it is not recorded in the biblical texts and lacks conclusive external archaeological confirmation. Why does this distinction matter? Because recognizing the different status of sources helps us understand how histories and identities are formed. A brief biblical episode can spark centuries of storytelling that serve national memory, theological claims, or dynastic legitimacy. Those stories are meaningful and deserve respectful attention, but they are not the same thing as information anchored in the earliest textual evidence. If this topic interests you, there's a lot more to explore. Translations of the Kebra Nagast, archaeological reports on South Arabian inscriptions and ruins, and comparative readings of the biblical and Quranic episodes. Tell us in the comments, were you already familiar with the Ethiopian tradition of Makeda and Menelik? Where are you watching from? And which version of the story surprised you most? If you enjoy historical investigations of biblical narratives, subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss the next deep dive.